Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Decloak podcast. And today's guest is Michael Calderin, who is the CISO of Yageo, Yageo Group. Michael is a keynote speaker, a board advisor, and most recently I saw on Michael's LinkedIn that he is a recipient of the CISO's Top 100 CISO. So yeah, congratulations, which is a huge honor within our circle. And how are you today, Michael? Are you okay?
Thanks, Leo. I'm doing great.
Excellent. And again, thank you for being on the podcast and thank you for your time. So yeah, typically we jump straight in when we ask our cyber leaders to give a brief overview of them and their career. So over to you, Michael.
All right. Well, where do I get started? I've been in IT and security for 30 years now. Self-taught, started doing consulting and working for small businesses when I was in high school and did that essentially nonstop through college and thereafter. Eventually went into a permanent position in academics, worked in healthcare for a number of years, in insurance, technology, manufacturing, which is what we're doing today at the Yageo Group. Really, my career, I think, has had a few themes. My focus has been on simplifying the way that we approach security, making sure that it's accessible and understandable to all of our stakeholders, and looking for ways to make cost-effective improvements that can be clearly justified and show why we're taking additional steps to protect information. It's, in many ways, hasn't changed a lot over the last few decades. Lots of technology changes, certainly lots of changes in adversaries and their approaches, but the job itself largely hasn't.
And through obviously an extensive career that you've had, Michael, what would you say has been some of your best roles and your least favorite roles that you've had in your career?
I think at one point they're all my best roles and all my least favorite roles.
Yeah.
There are certainly highlights. I love working as part of a great team, making improvements that really make a difference to people. I think there are ups and downs. No job is going to be perfect. No company is perfect. No career is perfect. You have your good points and your bad. There was a particular project, for example, when I was working at a university where we implemented campus-wide Wi-Fi at a time when that kind of thing was unheard of. That was really fun. We brought together people from different parts of the organization, from different organizations entirely, really. And we're able to tie together the technology, both in a shared perspective, as well as giving people access to their own private areas. All of that was brand new. And it was clear, we're making a difference to the tens of thousands of people that are here every day. There were doldrums in there too, where every day was sitting in front of a computer for 8 hours a day, looking at very similar incidents, reports, policies. You get your doldrums, but you get your exciting times too, and you've got to be able to temper them out.
Yeah. And obviously through your career moving into management positions, is there any tips that you would give to anyone when it comes to their first management position or their first CISO position?
Well, if you're moving into management, remember your job is changing. It's not a technology leadership role anymore. It is a people leadership role first. Treat the people that you have well. Treat people like people. That's what it comes down to. It's a very different type of role than a technology role. The challenges that we have aren't integration. They're not problem solving in the same way. You have to treat those components differently. Just as if you have multiple operating systems or programming languages, and you have to make them work together. You've got to understand people work very differently than systems do, and each of those people work in unique ways. You have to be able to alter your tactics.
I love that. I had a guest recently, and they compared a CISO role of being kind of a hybrid of middleware and APIs, and I love that approach. So, yeah, I mean, within your career, Michael, talk me through some of the challenges that you've been faced with, and ultimately how you managed to navigate through them.
I think the one repetitive challenge is always, why do we need more security? Why is what we're doing important? Everyone is going to agree to some extent, yeah, security is important. But when it comes down to actually impacting the way that they go about their lives, they go about their business, you're almost always going to get some pushback.
Yeah.
And so, figuring out how to communicate with all of those different people in the ways that they need to has certainly been a challenge along the way. I'm a pretty introverted guy, despite the fact that I'm here recording myself. It takes time to really get to know people. And the more you invest in that, the more successful you're going to be in the long run. It doesn't always, lead to a quick response, but it pays off over time.
Yeah.
Again, you have to treat it differently than you do a technical role. The problem is always making your case. It's not about how you're solving the problem, but why, or why now, or why is it worth this money or this amount of time? And knowing the perspective of the person that you're trying to reach. If you're talking to your CIO, if you're talking to your CFO, if you're talking to business leaders, they're all going to have unique perspectives. And you have to be able to adjust accordingly. In some ways, I love the middleware API reference because it's perfect for what we do. We have to be able to interface with everybody, from the most technical to the least technical, from the most experienced to the least. And the way that we do that always changes.
Yeah. And I think it's about the resilience we build, as a cyber leader. And, we've had many different people on the channel talk about the different approaches and, and how they would build resilience. And, for anyone that's either starting their career or maybe transitioning into a leadership role, would you have any advice on how they would build resilience to deal with various different challenges?
Personal resilience is tough. I'm not sure you have an opportunity to build it until you find yourself in some of those difficult situations. I can recommend the same type of approach that we take at an enterprise level, which is prepare. Think about the kinds of problems you're going to run into and work out, at least at a high level, what your plan will be to deal with it. The thing about plans is they always go wrong, but having some sense of where you're going, what that direction is, it just makes a huge difference. Now, plans can be refined and improved along the way, but having that North Star, that guiding light to tell you where you want to be at the end, that is probably the single most important aspect.
I love that. And in terms of any industry specific challenges that are facing cyber leaders or CISOs, what would you say is probably the most number one challenge that we're faced with within our industry?
I think the biggest challenge a lot of my peers talk about right now is dealing with the SEC.
Yeah.
We have a lot of requirements on us, and it's not just the SEC, so I'm not going to drill into that, but reporting requirements are increasing. The visibility in our roles is increasing, and we have to be able to adapt to that. In some cases, that means working much more closely with legal risk compliance teams, many of whom we're already building strong relationships with. And in other cases, it means paying very close attention to what it is we're willing to say during conversations like this one. Words matter, and we can't pretend that we can tell different stories to different people and the world won't find out. I mean,
Yeah.
the internet's been around a long time. We should know better than that by now.
Yeah, absolutely. Sound advice. And then, moving on to a specific topic that you want to discuss that you feel needs relevance and cleaning up within the industry. So, yeah.
Oh, pet peeves. Third-party risk management.
Love it.
It's been a challenge everywhere. I mean, I've been either sending questionnaires or responding to them for a long time now, and the nature of those don't really change much over the years. We may ask new questions. We had a big incident with CrowdStrike last week, and it's like, okay, well, that's the latest questionnaire. Well, do you use CrowdStrike? What was your impact? Are you going to deliver the products that you said you would on time? But in reality, third-party risk management is hard. It's easy to send questionnaires. It's easy to respond to them. How do you drive difference within those organizations? How do you approach senior leaders within your company and say, these guys might be too risky to do business with? Being able to put a dollar figure on that and say, we're taking this amount of risk if we engage in this contract, that's been tough. And beyond that, it shouldn't, let me back that up. It shouldn't be so much about deciding whether or not to do business. It should be about lifting everybody up, making sure that the partners that your organization establishes are able to meet your requirements and continuously improve their security programs. We're all stretched thin. Nobody has time to go help another company with their programs, or at least it's very rare to see.
Yeah.
And the smaller the organization, the less effective third-party risk management can be. We've all seen the grades that specialist companies will provide. Okay, well, you get an A and you get an F, and you get a 90 and you get a 30. It's all very relative, and it's hard to trust that you're looking at the right information, especially when you're only looking from the outside in. I mean, you think about a ball and think about the earth. The sun is hitting the earth, but what's happening underground? It starts to get cooler the minute you start to dig. Now I know that metaphor won't hold up if you keep digging, but the point being, you're looking from the outside and you're not seeing what's happening internally. Maybe it's an indicator, but even a company that may get a perfect score from one of these risk rating agencies can still be a big risk that you don't know about. And so it always goes back to, how do you measure that improvement? You can look at how companies are responding to these questionnaires and their ability to say, yes, we're doing that over time. But again, it's a movement indicator. It's not necessarily a risk indicator. I mean, the same is true of training programs, but that's a separate topic entirely.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, because I think everyone most people I know don't really want to touch the third party piece. I think it's maybe too taxing on them. We don't have enough time, as you'd mentioned. Maybe there's a lack of automation. Maybe there isn't enough understanding of you. You want to onboard a vendor to fix a problem, but the people sourcing the vendor don't really know what they're looking at. Again, they'll be like, hey, this vendor has A, B, whatever, but they've had like 10 data breaches. How are they still scoring an A? It's because the tool that's being used to scan these vendors is only looking at a web domain and not really looking at public issues or anything else that may be associated. And I think again, there's a lack of ability to quantify around risk assessments with vendors. We've all been on the end of it where you get like 100, 150 questions that you need to fill in, and it's like the most taxing thing ever. And I think maybe that's where the future of trust centers, there's many different GRC tools that provide this, that then allows you to put SOC reports, pen test reports, and various other components that allow you to then profile a vendor, especially, if we're talking about the vendors that we're looking to onboard. And I think it's easier. I would love a universal law where we'll only work with vendors if they meet 2 criteria. That would be absolutely perfect. I've been in situations where I've worked for large banks and they've outsourced maybe cert signing for their website, and it's like 2 people in a garage, or they've been part of a 4th or a 5th party of that supply chain, and it's like, oh my word. You start to dig in when you do that due diligence. And I guess I think an area where there needs to be more focus. I don't think there's enough tooling, and I don't think there's enough industry experts that are kind of raising that bar, or people that enjoy third-party risk management. Well, that's just my perception on it. But do you have any other items you'd like to add into that?
Well, thinking about some of those problems for smaller outsourcing arrangements, you can control the technology a little bit. If you provide access to your own systems, then the processes that these outsourced individuals or companies will follow really does have to closely align with yours because they're in your environment.
Yeah.
But many times we're entering into these agreements not just because we need additional headcount, but because some other company has a strong process that they've developed themselves to do a certain job. They're reliant on their systems and their internal processes. And so we have to give up that control.
Yeah.
But in the end, we're still responsible for that data. If there is an incident, it's going to come back to us, whether or not they're mentioned at all. If we're trusted with that data, we have some responsibilities for it. Despite whatever differences there may be in different parts of the world about who owns that data and where responsibility really ends, from a consumer perspective, if I share my data with you, Leo, and you outsource it to somebody else and they lose it, you're probably the one I'm going to hold responsible. And that's true everywhere. So even if there are no other reasons than brand reputation and customer retention, security is really critical in everything we do, especially as it filters down to the organizations that we work with in order to fulfill our missions. We need to find better ways as an industry to solve this problem. SOC 2 reports are useful. They outline where our responsibilities end and theirs begin. They look at a number of controls throughout the year to validate that they are being performed effectively, but there are always gaps. If you look at, well, I shouldn't say always, but there are oftentimes gaps between what you would expect in your internal policies and the way that a third party will do it. And so they help to bridge that gap a little bit, those kinds of assurance reports. But again, if you have thousands of vendors within your ecosystem, are you looking at that for everybody? And there are other risks too. Let's not just consider information sharing risks, but will they be able to deliver on time? Are there geopolitical issues? Are there logistical issues? It's not an area where there is a clear path forward. I guess which really brings me into, a problem that we face everywhere in the industry. We all do things differently. There's so much inconsistency in the way that we manage our security programs, the way that we provide metrics, the way that leadership expects us to meet their needs and show them that we are protecting their organizations. It's easy for somebody in another industry. Finance is a great example because you have generally accepted accounting principles. You have standard practices. It's easy to go in and read a report that says, here are all of my financial information. Here's my EBITDA, here's my gross margins, et cetera, and understand the state that the organization is in, or prepare a report if you're new to the job on just what's happened over the last 30 days. In security, you have to spend so much time understanding your audience. You have to be able to communicate in the ways that they expect, which may not be the way that your last company expected, or the way that you internally think about the information. Again, it brings us back to the idea of adapting to the surroundings that we're in. It's important to our individual success and the success of our programs. But when it comes to the industry as a whole, it's working against us in some ways because we have all of these different perspectives. Diversity of thought is great. It's critical to coming up with new solutions and advancing everything. But if we don't really iron out the basics of how we manage the program, we're all in this alone. And that's not a place any of us want to be.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to take a couple of minutes and talk about today's sponsor, which is Vanta. Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Through my experiences of using Vanta, Vanta automates compliance. It covers everything from SOC 2, ISO 27001, HIPAA, and many more, saving you time and money, while helping you build customer trust. I love all the insights that it gives me, covering everything from asset management, my control failures, audit status, even vulnerabilities from other connecting systems which have been integrated into the platform. Having a centralized place for something like an ISO program has been a godsend for me. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. Why Vanta? With over 7,000 global companies like Atlassian, Flow Health, and Quora, they all use Vanta to manage risk and provide security in real time. So, my listeners can claim a special offer of $1,000 off Vanta at vanta.com/decloaked. That's vanta.com/decloaked. Thanks. Yeah, and I guess, that's why we need to continue the outreach within our community to make sure we have standardized practices. You just touched upon, like finance have strict principles around how you would probably raise an invoice or how you would submit financial data to a regulator or whatever it may be, or an SEC filing. These sorts of things, that's just standard and everyone accepts them. And I'm interested to get your point of view of why do you think we don't have standard practices in security? Like, imagine there's a rule of thumb within cyber and infosec. There's these 5 things that everyone knows, right? It's like everyone does it. It's kind of like I work in companies in software development, and people use different tools and different approaches, even for testing. And, I'm interested, why do you think we don't have these kind of standard principles? Do you think it's maybe there's just too many vendors, or I don't know, it's like some sort of universal thing I'm trying to kind of quantify here in my head, but I'm like, yeah, I'm interested to get your point. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think we have to be fair at the same time. Yes, we have these problems and we want them to be better, but we're babies.
Yeah.
And we're a very new industry in the grand scheme of things. You know, we've all been, as a society, as a human race, we've been doing accounting for a very, very, very long time.
Thousands of years. Yeah.
Exactly. And if you compare that to the last 30 or 40 years within IT and what is now developing as information and cybersecurity, it's a drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
But even thinking about finance as an example, it took some major blowups to really
That's
come
true.
up with standards.
Yeah.
So there has to be, or let me not say that, because I don't want there to be a big blow up. But if we look at past successes in other industries, it was some event that led to public outcry, that led to regulation, that drove this forward.
Yeah.
Can we do that ourselves without those things happening? Yes. But again, are we making the time to do that? Are we making the time to publicize and gain acceptance and push that out within the industry? In some ways, regulation has its advantages because after a period of time to review, someone is saying, this is the way it is. You have to comply with this now. Whereas as an industry, if we do it ourselves, we could go back and forth on this forever. At some point, we have to be willing to say, this is good enough for now. Let's do this, and then we'll continue iterating and improve. But we have to identify what those steps are at various levels, where we're willing to say, this is good enough for now. Thinking about some of the standards that we measure ourselves against, things like this CSF or even ISO 27001 as frameworks, they evolve over time. There should be a similar approach in the way we manage the program.
Yeah. I completely agree that an event equals regulation, or needs something to happen. And, I think with the emergence of multiple different attack types, thrown in AI, thrown in organized crime, we're now hearing that organized crime have accountancy and HR departments. That's the kind of the extent of how well oiled these machines are. And I think regulation definitely helps us with that. You need to comply with this. You can't navigate around it. But then it opens up, I think, an opportunity for our community to work with people and regulators to say, hey, some of the stuff you're talking about in these frameworks, they're out of date already. So they need to be adjusted because of attack type A or an event equal B. Then I would hope that there's a synergy between the cyber community and regulators where there is guiding principles, guiding frameworks, and they're relevant rather than waiting like 10 years for an update for like an ISO standard or something, which then obviously leaves industry behind. But I guess it's a money making industry, so you need good things and you need bad things to make it work. So any other thoughts on that?
Well, look, it's easy to poke the bear and come up with problems. I don't have the solution for this. I think the challenge is, and what really brought us into this position is the fact that all of our organizations are different.
Yeah.
Different leaders, different goals, different strategies and risks. And so it's only natural to evolve different ways of measuring and managing security programs for these different types of organizations. We're going to have to find a way to bridge that gap if we want to take this thing that we do, whether you call it a career or a profession or an industry, whatever it is, take that to the next level and put it on par with other types of business leaders.
Yeah, I completely agree. And back to your main topic about third party risk. Do you think there's just a lack of understanding around? To me, I think sometimes it gets caught up in people just see it as a transaction. You pay a third party for a thing and that's it. Do you think there's maybe a lack of education around, or that relationship continues? It's not just you buy a jacket or a new pair of jeans and that's you done. I think maybe people within various different areas like procurement, maybe legal, privacy, maybe they just maybe are not getting enough support from security to make it a continuation where you would have quarterly vendor reviews, or you would have check-ins, or various different, you would work with them on a roadmap if they didn't have a specific standard that you wanted them to adhere to. So yeah, do you think there's maybe a lack of understanding around third party risk?
I think that's part of it. I feel like that's a crutch.
Yeah.
If I'm really going to be straight with you, Leo, I hear that about everything. It's like, oh, they just don't understand, whether it's third-party risk management or something else. And it's so easy I think, to fall into that trap. And I'm not saying it's wrong. I think there's got to be a part of that that's true.
Yeah.
But we can't just go around saying nobody understands what we do. What we do is so hard and nobody else can get it. No, that's not the way to move us forward. I think that the challenge is really that it's not their job to understand or to think about that all the time. It takes a special level of cynicism to always be considering those risks. I mean, I'll give you an example. I have a doctor, a general practitioner. Am I monitoring to see if my doctor has ever been, questioned or censured or whatever the approach is in that industry if he does something wrong? Am I monitoring the financial viability of the people who come in and clean my house or mow my lawn? Am I taking extra steps to put things away or monitor them while they're here in those situations? No, I don't have time for that. But we all have things that we want to do. And so there's some level of risk that is going to be assumed regardless. You can't monitor every risk. And I think that is largely the attitude within organizations as well. Like, that's a cost of doing business, or it's so rare that it's not going to happen to us. You can't have business without risk. That I completely agree with. But where is the effort, the regularity, the process to determine what is the level of risk for this particular arrangement, and are we willing to live with that? More often than not, what I see, especially in smaller organizations, is a gut check. It's a swag. It's a finger in the air saying, yeah, that seems okay. And I have to acknowledge the fact is 99 point whatever percent of the time, they're right. It's those rare occasions where something goes horribly wrong that we're trying to protect against. And so it brings us back to this discipline of third-party risk management. It takes a considerable amount of money and effort and time to understand those risks well enough to really protect against those rare situations.
I like that. It's a good analysis. And then I don't know if you've actually answered this through our breakdown of the questions, but I'll ask our final question. Was the one thing in cyber you think is BS, needs a focus on, or needs to change? Yeah.
I think you mentioned something earlier about needing degrees for positions in cyber. That is one that I vehemently disagree with. Myself not having one, I can relate to that personally, and it's not just a matter of what's in it for me. It's what have I seen? Degrees can help. They can certainly open doors, but some of the most successful people I've had working in my teams, they're not people with computer science or cybersecurity degrees. Cybersecurity degrees didn't even exist when I was on that path. That's a funny story in and of itself. But some of the best folks I've worked with have been social workers. They've gone to seminary. They've had non-traditional ways of bringing themselves up through whatever seemed interesting to them at the time, and that diversity of thought is hugely important. More than anything else, curiosity, willing to put yourself in some uncomfortable situations sometimes, and understanding that you're going through all this trouble to make your organization, your team, the world a slightly better place. Give me those qualities, and I will show you somebody who can do a job in cyber. The range is so wide within this industry that there's room for everybody who wants to do the work. There may be different directions for them to go based on what their skills are, but that's our responsibility as leaders to help shepherd them there. And it's not something that we've done really well, if I'm being honest. We should have, honest to God, entry-level positions in cybersecurity, where you don't need experience in IT. I've been fortunate to create a couple of roles like that throughout the course of my career, but it's something that, again, we need to be able to standardize on and do as an industry. We need better paths forward for people as they're coming in. Many programs really don't dedicate the time to building up personnel. And so we find ourselves in this situation where we are highly competitive for talent, always trying to pay more than the next guy if your wallets will allow it. When the reality of the situation is there are lots of people who could do the work if we put in the time and invest in making it happen. Long-term thinking versus what we need here and now.
Yeah, I think there's always a stigma associated with it, or there's a kind of element where people are just impatient. And you're right, you could go hire someone at X salary, and they're a bit of a unicorn, but they also come maybe with, I don't know, maybe some diva mindset, whereas when you get someone who's fresh, young, or maybe from a complete different industry making the leap in, but they have heart, they have determination, they have a willingness to just consume an obscene amount of information. They're hungry. It's like the age old, like, no one wants to pick a rookie from the draft, even though they could be the best, I don't know, offensive player, or whatever sports analogy or metaphor that we're going to use here. I think I always refer back to one of the best people I've ever hired had come from a complete different industry. They then shoehorned their way into like physical security, and then kind of learned from that, did some project management and audit work. And then that's how they kind of ventured in. They went from being an air hostess, the most non-conventional approach you would have, into cyber. And, I think we definitely need to create opportunities for people who are maybe transitioning from a different stage in their life, a different career path, or they're literally maybe they have an interest in technology and they're just wired a specific way, which will be really good for a specific skill set. And I think it's an element we'll always probably struggle with. And the industry will always moan that there isn't enough skill set because they're either too ignorant or they're just too scared to take a punt on someone. But yeah, any closing thoughts on that, Michael?
I think we're starting to move in the right direction. There's certainly a lot more talk about this. Frameworks like NICE have come along to try to standardize the way that we think about the jobs, but it's going to require more working with schools, both with colleges and universities, as well as technical schools and even high schools or secondary schools, to expose people to the field, find out who's really thinking about solving problems in the way that we're looking for them to. Again, I have a lot of personal struggles with some of the topics that we're talking about today because I see both sides of it.
Yeah.
On one hand, I really want standardization. I want us to act in unison and show off the abilities of our profession in a way that everybody can clearly understand. But in the other hand, I have to recognize everybody's got unique perspectives. There's lots of value in that diversity of thinking. And so trying to build both at the same time has been a struggle throughout my career. Being part of peer organizations, being part of professional societies, it helps to slowly spread the word and find those standards that we want to latch onto. But at the same time, again, every organization is different, every team is different. We have to be able to adapt to that. And there's always a give and take between what's best for self and team and company versus what's best for the industry in general. There are fortunately a lot of things that line up, but sometimes when it comes to how we present ourselves and how we present the results of our work, we can go in some pretty divergent directions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think no one has a silver bullet when it comes to these things. And, again, probably further advocacy for expanding our community, trying to get things moving forward and things moving quicker, and open that up to other people so they can become a part of it. So yes, well, Michael, we will conclude then. Again, thank you so much for your time. And as I always say in this channel to the audience, all the YouTube jargon, the like, sub, share, all that stuff. And again, please, to our audience, give some any feedback, questions that you might have when the episode drops later on this year. And again, Michael, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you for having me, Leo. It's been a fun conversation.
Thanks again.